Yes, you're welcome to my YouTube channel. This is Martin, and today we are going to look at overhead costs accounting, or rather, you can call it accounting for overhead costs. So, without wasting time, I think we can define what are overhead costs. So, these are common costs representing an aggregate of indirect costs. For example, we may say indirect material costs, indirect labor costs, and indirect expenses. These costs cannot be identified with a specific cost center, or rather cost unit. Why? These costs are normally incurred for the benefit of more than one product or cost unit, so they can't be easily identified towards one cost unit. Overhead cost accounting, or accounting for overhead costs, will comprise both manufacturing and non-manufacturing costs, and that's what we are going to look at. We shall deal with that, but we shall first deal with the theory bit of it. Then we tackle quite a large number of examples here and there, so that we try to appreciate the concept. So while accounting for overhead costs, we have mostly two common methods that we're going to deal with here. We have TPC, which is the traditional costing method, and then we have ABC, which is the activity-based costing method. So let's start with the TPC. When accounting for overheads using TPC, we go through a bit of a few stages here, and let's try to see what they are. This will guide us when we are doing the computations later on. So we have here the stages that are common in TPC when we are assigning common costs to cost centers. And the first stage here under TPC is collecting and classifying of overheads. We collect the overheads and we classify them. And then we got allocation and apportionment of overheads. Then the third one is a reapportionment of service department costs to production departments. Then later on, after that, we finally absorb these overheads to cost units or cost products. So let's try to dig a bit deep into these stages. Let's go back to the first stage, which is collection and classification of overheads. So when you're collecting and classifying overheads, here you have to source or gather common overheads or common overhead costs from different sources, and these sources can be invoices, can be stores requisition notes, could be wages analysis sheets, and so on. The collected overhead costs grouped into different categories. You group them into different categories for better analysis. For example, you can group them like into fixed overheads, semi-variable costs, variable costs. But in case of mixed costs, because sometimes we have mixed costs. In case of mixed costs, it's so difficult to segregate these variable costs from fixed costs. But then we can separate them through a certain method. This method is it's called a high-low method, or you can call it range method. So the high-low method, or the range method, is this one whereby we say variable cost per unit equals to the cost of the highest activity minus the cost of the low activity. Then you divide by the difference in the total activity. But our difference in total activity, we get it by subtracting the lowest output from the highest output. So difference in total activity equals to highest output minus lowest output. And then the second step or stage here is allocation and apportionment of overheads, which is the same as primary distribution. So when you're distributing for the first time, which is the allocation and apportionment of overheads, remember I said it's also known as primary distribution. This stage means that we are going to assign the indirect costs to the cost centers or the departments. Allocation of overheads is done by only maybe if they can be directly identified with the cost center or the department itself that relates to that cost. But if they cannot be identified, then we don't need to what? We don't need to allocate. However, a cost that cannot be allocated can be apportioned or distributed to the cost centers. Apportionment of overheads refers to the distribution or to the sharing of indirect costs by different cost centers using appropriate bases. Apportionment, it's like sharing the indirect costs to different cost centers using basing on the appropriate basis, apportionment basis. For example, let's give an illustration here. Let's have our item or cost item and the apportionment base, so that we can try to pick up what we're trying to illustrate here. So our first cost item can be rent and rates. Rent and rates can be apportioned basing on the area. Rent, if you're renting out a certain place, you can apportion the costs basing on the area of the place you're renting out. Then our second cost item can be electricity. Electricity we can apportion it using more basing on kilowatts, basing on number of lighting points, basing on area. Then our third cost item also can be medical costs or welfare costs. These can be apportioned basing on the number of staff in an organization. Then our other cost item can be insurance costs. This can be apportioned basing on book value of machines. Depreciation costs we can apportion them basing on book value of machines. Because in a company, if you're utilizing machines for production, that means they depreciate. So the depreciation costs we shall apportion basing on the book value of the machines at that time. Then other cost item can be canteen or recreation costs. This we can apportion it basing on the number of employees. Then we can also have heat and lighting costs as another cost item. It can be apportioned basing on the number of lighting points. So the third stage we had was reapportionment of service center costs to production cost centers. Reapportioning the service center costs to production centers, and this is also known as secondary distribution. So under this secondary distribution, costs are reapportioned or reassigned to production departments depending on how each production department has benefited from the service department, or the extent to which a service department has been used by the production department. We also continue to notice that under this secondary distribution, it has different approaches or methods for tackling it. The first is a direct approach. Then we also have a elimination or step approach. Then we have the repeated distribution method. Then we have the simultaneous equation or algebraic method. So all these four methods we shall go through them, but I think we shall have to start with the primary distribution. Then later on we continue with secondary distribution, which has four methods, and we shall have examples to illustrate all those methods. I think for primary distribution, let's meet in the next video. Thank you for watching. Kindly subscribe.